Getting the midterms back and you are in no mood to listen to me, and you also just completed your project. Plus, I guess a whole bunch of grad students are off looking for jobs rather than taking classes. But here we are. As far as the exam is concerned, I will post the answers. Most likely, I will post a video with the answers. I think a bunch of people actually need remedial education on the stuff that's been done. As I mentioned, so this is how the numbers for the entire class were. Honestly, I think if you are below this, you actually did not get what is going on in the class. I would normally like to say to students that I set hard exams, and that in fact what the exam tells me more about is who is smart as against being differentiating between the people who didn't understand the material. But this exam was not like that. This exam was supposed to be easy. This is the easiest I can say. Okay. To be honest with you, essentially normal midterms for this course would have about double the material covered for the midterm, and I just took half of some other midterm and gave it to you. Okay, so I'm not here to depress you, but at the same time, I actually would like to tell you that if you are getting below 40, then you are not actually understanding. You didn't understand some of the search algorithms. We mostly just talked about search algorithms in this exam, and you didn't get it. That's my view. Okay. So it's a good diagnostic, I guess, at least, if nothing else. Any questions on this at this point? Okay. So the grading is done by me, so if you have questions about the grading, ask me. You might also want to look at the solutions first, which I hope to post before the next class, so that you'll have an idea what was expected answers for most of those questions. Okay, so no questions on any of this stuff? So and the projects were submitted here. Project 1 is submitted here. I'll take this back, and one thing I would actually appreciate, I'll open like I plan to normally do sort of a midterm feedback thing, middle of the semester feedback thing. But I guess I would do that too, but those are questions I ask, and normally it all goes well in general. So I actually would like to hear from people who aren't, who are below 40, really, as to if there are things that could be done, that would help you. Okay, if you, we will try if it's possible. If there's something that we can do to help you understand better, we'll try. Okay. If you don't spend time on this, there's not much I can do, obviously. But if you're spending time on it and you're having trouble understanding, then, I would like to know. I'll open some sort of an anonymous feedback channel, and then, you can send me mail. Okay. You're also, of course, welcome to send me mail directly anyway, but I will at least open an anonymous. So that's basically all I have about the test 1. As I said, it's good actually. There's going to be another test at least before the semester is over, and there will be a final. Okay, so that's the minimum number of tests for this course. Okay. Questions? Any more questions? Any questions? Okay. So we were doing propositional logic and theorem proving with propositional logic, right? So Yeah. And so we actually, I guess, last class, we looked at, this was a very important slide. I hope you understood that we are talking about, theorem proving involves search, because you need to figure out which pair of clauses you're going to resolve together. Okay. There are any number of pairs of clauses you can resolve, but what's important is if you can get an empty clause after having thrown the negation of the goal and converted the whole thing into the clausal form. If you can get an empty clause, then you prove the theorem. If not, you fall out of this loop, then you say the theorem is not true. Okay, here is an interesting question. So suppose I wanted to prove, given a knowledge base KB, I wanted to prove whether J holds. Okay, and this thing said, no, it doesn't hold. Okay, now I want to know, does it entail not J? Do you understand what I'm saying? So I wanted to prove J. That wasn't true. I mean, I couldn't prove it. So does that mean that I just proved that not J is true? This is a very important thing to understand about propositional logic. Basically, the fact that J is not true means, there are some set S of models for KB, okay, and at least one of them is not a model for J, right? So I can imagine that this knowledge base has M1, M2, etc., M3 as the models, and suppose M2 is not a model for J, then J is not entailed, right? But if M1 is not a model for J, not a model for not J, then not J is not entailed. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's actually possible, and in fact that's more likely the case, that when you can't prove a theorem, it's not necessarily the case that the negation of the theorem holds. Okay? Because in some models J is holding and some models not J is holding. That means neither of them are holding in all models. Right? That means neither of them are holding in all models. That means it's not actually, you cannot be sure that either J or not J is true in every world where the knowledge base is true. Okay? So this is important to understand. We get three values essentially when you're talking about theorems. You can, either the theorem is true, either J is true or J is false, or you can't say anything about J. Because it's true in some of the models and false in other of the models. Okay. Later on, we'll talk about, at some point of time, an idea called closed world assumption. And that, in essence, says if I can't prove something, I just assume that the negation of it is true. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, if I can't prove something, then I'll assume that the negation of it is true. Okay, that doesn't actually make any sense in normal logic. That's why it's an extra assumption. Okay, and there are some reasons why you might want to do it. Sometimes it makes things easier. However, if you do closed world assumption, you're no longer in propositional logic. You see what I'm saying? In propositional logic, if you can't prove J, it doesn't mean you have just proved not J. Okay? And then we also talked about the heuristics for doing this, picking the pairs of clauses that we can deal with, right? One heuristic was basically consider the pair of clauses which have a set of support. That means at least one of the clauses either is the goal clause or is related to the goal clause through resolutions. And the other one is linear input form, where at least one of the clauses must be one of the clauses in the input knowledge base directly. And it turns out both of them cut down the branching in terms of the number of classes, number of pairs you have to consider, but only this is complete, this is not complete. And the interesting thing here is we talked about search as sort of we mentioned that search is going to be a common theme in this course. We'll do search in lots and lots of scenarios. We do A-star search, okay? But this is search too. In this case, A-star search directly doesn't make sense because we talked about the fact that we are assuming that the length of the proof doesn't matter. What matters is whether you proved or not proved. How many pages you took to prove doesn't matter. And this is actually true, by the way, even in mathematics right now, while people would look for elegant proofs, the first guy who provides the proof gets all the credit. The second guy who provides an elegant proof rarely gets any more credit, right? If you were to suddenly go back today, so the Fermat's last theorem was proved, right? None of us understand the proof. I mean, if any of you understand, please come and explain it to me. It's been proved, and 3 people understand that it's actually been proved, and it takes, a humongous amount of, reasoning to show that it's actually the proof has been done. Maybe tomorrow you will find a proof which is 3 pages shorter, and you still not get anywhere near the kind of adulation that he got. I mean, of course, mathematicians don't get the kind of adulation Angelina Jolie gets, but even by that level, right, you're not going to get anywhere near the kind of adulation Andrew Wiles got. Okay, because the length of the proof, people talk about elegance, but the first proof wins the race. And among the worst of these scenarios is the 4-color theorem. How many of you know about 4-color theorem? Okay, so 4-color theorem essentially says that if you have a planar graph, then you can, and you are essentially trying to give colors to the vertices such that no 2 connected vertices, that means no 2 vertices which have an edge between them, have the same color. That's called coloring the graph. The question is, how many colors do you need to color a graph? Okay, and in fact, coloring theorem is very useful for maps. In a planar map, you need to put different colors for the different countries. And if the countries are connected to each other, if they're touching each other anywhere, and if they have the same color, you would think they're the same country. So you need to have them having different colors. So the question is, as you increase the number of countries, the size of the graph increases, the connectivity increases, you kind of assume that there is going to be more colors needed. The question is, how many colors will you need? And basically there is this conjecture for a long time that 4 colors should be enough. It's been proved now. It's actually proved theorem. Except the way that proof was done was using some humongous number of cases. They essentially considered that of all the planar graphs can be split into this, I don't know, anybody knows? 355 cases. Okay? And for each of these 355 cases, the computer would verify that, in fact, you can actually color it with 4 colors. Some mathematicians don't like this proof, but it's still done. Nobody came up with a better proof yet. Okay? So the point of all this is that until the length of the proof somehow becomes important, it's okay not to do A-star search for theorem proving. You just need completeness. There's no difference in the quality of proofs. Either the proof is done or not done. Okay? So that's the difference. That's the reason why this search looks quite different from A-star search. And in a minute, we'll talk about search for model finding, which is satisfiability. That would look again different from A-star search. And when search looks different, what you want to understand is there's a reason why it looks different. A-star basically assumes the path length matters. Okay? And so in this case, the path length didn't matter. And then the A-star also assumes that the goal nodes can occur anywhere in the graph. Okay? If that doesn't hold, then you don't need A-star, it turns out. Okay? We'll see that in a minute. Okay? So that's just going back over that. So we talked about, this has been mentioned earlier. In essence, propositional inference is NP hard. It's actually co-NP hard because essentially what happens is that checking whether the KB entails J is equivalent to checking if KB and not J have no models. That means no model satisfies KB and not J. If you showed that, you showed this. And if you showed this, you showed that. Okay, that's the connection between satisfiability on one side and theorem proving on the other side. And in fact, we'll see in today's class, we'll talk a lot more about this part, the satisfiability part. Okay, and satisfiability and theorem proving, it turns out, are sort of nicely connected. Okay, one is a conjugate problem of the other. Showing that there is no model is like showing that alpha is entailed. Normally, when you look at satisfiability problem, which we'll be doing in today's class, not directly, you are looking for a model that satisfies all the clauses. Here, you're actually trying to show that there is no model that satisfies this theory, because that's the only time when you can say KB entails J. That reasoning allows you to say, remembering that satisfiability is NP complete, which is something that you're supposed to have known from theory courses. Propositional logic is co-NP complete. Okay, but there are parts of propositional logic that actually, are in fact, and in fact, the idea of why theorem proving becomes exponential, one intuitive reason you want to understand is resolution does case analysis. Okay, that's one way you start increasing the amount of search, which means if you are not doing resolution, then maybe you don't have to do as much work. Okay, so given a database of a knowledge base of size k, doing all possible resolutions on that knowledge base will take exponential time in essence. But if you are only doing all possible modus-ponens, do you see what I'm saying? All possible modus-ponens, that can be done in polynomial time. Okay, but we just found, so basically if I have A implies B, B implies C, C implies D, and I just said A, you can use modus-ponens to say, oh, because A is true, B is true, because B is true, C is true, because C is true, D is true. You did all the modus-ponens right now, just there. Okay, another way of doing modus-ponens, which is very useful, is if A and B implies C, and J implies A, and K implies B, and J is true, K is true. Right? So that because of J is true, A is true, K is true, B is true, A and B is true, so A is true, so C can be said to be true. So in fact, then you can ask, is C true? And you will prove this. Does anybody see this reminding them of something? How many of you know prologue? Have you heard of prologue? Okay, that's prologue. That's just prologue in propositional form. Okay? Prologue actually just does modus-ponens. Okay, it does what's called generalized modus-ponens, and it does modus-ponens on the first order logic, so it's slightly more interesting than propositional modus-ponens. But essentially, it is doing just modus-ponens. Okay, so an interesting question is, you know that doing modus-ponens itself can be done in polynomial time. Okay. Are they, and if I, basically, in this case, all the theorems that can be proved by modus-ponens. Right? Whereas, if I did not say, instead of this, if I said, instead of this, if I said J implies A, M implies A, and J are M, and K. Right? Okay, you can see this is a small enough database. You can see M implies A, J implies A. Either J or M must be true, so A must be true. And then K is true, so B is true. A and B are true. C is true. You're done. right? In this case, actually, if I didn't have this and I only had this, and if I just use modus-ponens, I wouldn't have been able to prove that C is true. Do you see what I'm saying? This is why you needed resolution. So the question is there some restriction I can put on this knowledge base such that modus-ponens itself will be complete? So you could ask the following question, right? I mean, so somebody got 62 in this exam, somebody got 30 in this exam. The person who got 30 might ask, maybe this is not the class. Maybe I should be Rao should be teaching me a different class so that my 30 would be the highest. That's the best you should be doing in this class. And I can do that, and over a period of time, we can dilute classes such that we'll both come to the same place. Okay? So the question is there a dilution of this knowledge base, a restriction on this knowledge base such that just modus-ponens would be complete? And you can almost guess. Problem occurred because of this guy, JRM. Right? So say there should not be any clauses like JRM. That's what you want to say. Okay? And it turns out there's a beautiful idea called Hahn clauses. What is a Hahn clause? If you take your knowledge base and convert it into CNF, you'll get clauses. And a clause is called a Hahn clause if it has at most one positive literal in it. At most one positive literal in it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. Now let's see. This A and B implies C. When you convert it, it will become not of A and B or C, which will be not A or not B or C. Is it Hahn clause? Yeah, because there's only one positive. Similarly, M and A will become not M or A. Is it Hahn clause? Yes. J implies A, not J or A. Is it Hahn clause? Yes. The same thing, K implies B. How about K? Yeah, that's a Hahn clause. It's a clause by itself, and there's only one positive thing, so it's a Hahn clause. So who is the bad guy? This guy. Because he has two positives. So it turns out that if you only have Hahn knowledge bases, that means if you have a knowledge base which basically is Hahn clauses only, then you can just do modus-ponens and you would be complete. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so in fact, that's basically what it means. So the database only has Hahn sentences, then generalized modus-ponens will be complete, and in that case, theorem proving for that knowledge base would be polynomial time, because modus-ponens can be done in polynomial time. But I mean, it's like if you happen to have a Hahn class database, it's one thing. What people use this for is they will take a knowledge base which has Hahn clauses, non-Hahn clauses, and say remove it. Okay, and then say now it's complete. Okay, that's nonsensical, but that's what actually happens. In many cases, you will essentially stop people from writing non-Hahn clauses just so that you can say that you are complete with modus-ponens. So it's like you can stop teacher from teaching you division so that you can say you are complete just knowing multiplication, addition, and subtraction. You see what I'm saying? Okay, but it's kind of interesting to know, what is the crisp constraint that you can put on the knowledge base such that modus-ponens itself will be complete. And that is that. That's the tractable class of propositional logic. Okay? A very useful thing to know. And in fact, Prolog basically uses first-order Hahn sentences. And so in fact, Prolog can be understood very easily because it essentially is doing this modus-ponens, chaining of rules. People understand chaining of rules much more easily than they understand, where is my example go? Yes, remember this example? That kind of makes your head spin. It's a small example, right? Okay, because you're doing case analysis, it's not as obvious as to how many cases you have to consider. But people understanding proof is not the way to decide whether or not you should be doing that proof necessarily, especially when you have something like completeness of the the inference procedure. Okay. Okay. One other interesting thing, since we said Horn clauses are good, for Horn clauses it turns out you can just do modus-ponens, and modus-ponens can be run to completion in polynomial time. There is another tractable class which we are interested in, which actually is going to be talked about in the next part of the lecture, which is called unit resolution. Unit resolution. What's unit resolution? You only resolve if one of the clauses is a unit clause. You only resolve if one of the clauses is a unit clause. The other can be as big as it wants, This is a unit resolution. Whereas is not a unit resolution. The reason unit resolution is nice is if you resolve these, the length of the clause reduces. Length of some clause reduced. Right? So you had J, R, P, J, R, R, P, R, Q, and not Q, you just get J, R, R, P. So you took a 4-length clause and made it into a 3-length clause. Why is reducing clause length useful? Because the goal is to get empty clause. And if you reduce, for example, J or not J, empty clause. That's unit resolution. Just as you can run all modus-ponens that can be run on a knowledge base in polynomial time, you can run all the unit resolutions that can be run, even with cascade. So because notice that sometimes you can, in the beginning, you might have something like this. P, R, Q, not Q, not P. Right? I can do one first resolution. So not P, R, Q, not Q, not P. And then P, R, Q, say, yeah, P, R, Q, not Q, and not P, R, J. Okay, and not J, let's say. Okay. So one of the interesting things here is I can do this as the unit resolution. So I will get a P. Then I can do this as the unit resolution. I can get a J. Then I can do these two as unit resolution. I can get an empty class. So the unit resolutions are not only being done on the original clauses, but also any clauses that come in. But you'll only do unit resolutions, no more. And if you run unit resolutions to completion, you can do it in polynomial time. And it's a useful thing for the following reason. Suppose you have this as the set of constraints in your knowledge base. And you want to see if this is consistent, if your knowledge base is consistent or not. And you ran unit resolution and you got an empty clause. Is it consistent? No. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if you just run unit resolution on your knowledge base and you got empty clause, then definitely it's not consistent. Okay? Not every inconsistent knowledge base could be found just by using unit resolution. However, if the unit resolution says you are inconsistent, then you are inconsistent. Okay? So this is a sound procedure for proving that what you have in your hand is inconsistent already. And this becomes very useful in the next topic we are talking about, which is satisfiability. Because in satisfiability, you're trying to see, is there a model for my constraints? And as you're doing in a minute, you'll see that as the way you do that is you do search over possible partial models. And if a partial model is already dead, then you want to get out of that search branch, go somewhere else. That's why unit resolution would be used in the next part. Okay? Any questions on this?
Unit resolution, is it complete?
It's not complete, obviously, right? Because Because suppose I can give you a database which is inconsistent, but unit resolution won't find it, for example. Unit resolution can be done in polynomial time, so it can't be complete. That's another way of finding it. Anytime somebody says, I have this inference procedure for propositional logic, it only takes polynomial time and it is complete. Then you say, I don't trust you unless you just found a sneaky proof for P equal to NP. Right? Because unless P equal to NP, it's not possible. Because we just found that this is going to be complete. So the entire edifice of computer science will fall. Everybody would be happy nonetheless, but because everything is polynomial. But we don't expect it to be. It's not a simple claim to say that there is a complete inference procedure that only takes polynomial time for propositional logic. Something has to give, right? So that's the complexity thing. And in fact, even though it is one slide, actually all the discussion I did here is very relevant. It should probably be multiple slides, including all this discussion. In particular, you want to understand what is Hahn clauses, and that Hahn clauses, for Hahn clause database, modus-ponens is complete. You should understand that modus-ponens can be run to completion on any knowledge base in polynomial time. But for just the Hahn clause database, when it stops, then there is nothing more you could have derived. For a non-Hahn clause database, maybe other things could have been derived. Okay? And then unit resolution can also be done in polynomial time. And it's a useful thing too. Okay? Okay. So now, since we kept talking about this connection between satisfiability and theorem proving, okay? Now, this was a big player until now. Satisfiability was in the back. Okay? I want to bring it to the front. And actually argue to you that satisfiability is just as interesting a problem as theorem proving. In fact, it's probably more interesting. Propositional theorem proving doesn't have that many applications, but propositional satisfiability has tons of applications in real world. Okay? And they're connected. In doing theorem proving, you use model finding. And in doing model finding, you use theorem proving. You'll see that too. Okay? So let's now talk about satisfiability. Basically, satisfiability is given a knowledge base. I want to see, is there a world where the knowledge base holds? That's all. Okay, it's actually a much simpler problem in some way. You just remember for each knowledge base, you drew this big truth table and found all the rows of that truth table where the knowledge base is evaluating to true. Right? And then check within each of those rows what you want to prove is also true. Satisfiability is a much easier problem. I'm just asking, is there a row where knowledge base evaluates to true? That's all. If so, just let me know. So is there a valuation of true-false values for the propositions in the knowledge base, such that for those values, using just the rules of Boolean logic, you can see that the entire knowledge base evaluates to true? That's all. Just find a model. Okay? Unfortunately, it's not any easier than theorem proving in some sense, because the satisfiability, as I said, is NP complete, and theorem proving is conjugate problem of it. It's co-NP complete. Okay, so given a set of propositional formulas, find a model. That's what satisfiability is. Finding a model means getting truth-false values for the variables such that all the clauses, the whole knowledge base becomes true. Okay, what that actually means is it turns out that this can be seen as a constraint satisfaction problem in a general term. In a general way of thinking. Okay, basically every knowledge base constraint is a knowledge base fact is a constraint. If there is an axiom in the knowledge base, that means only the worlds where that axiom will hold are allowed. I mentioned this. You know more and more, you reduce less. Your choice, your understanding about the world you live in becomes smaller and smaller. Right? And that's good. When it becomes 0, then you're in trouble. That means you are not actually existing. But if you reduce the uncertainty about the world you are living in, that's good. Okay? So essentially, the knowledge base formulas are constraints, and you're trying to find values for the variable such that all constraints are satisfied. So it's a constraint satisfaction problem. And this is also my sneaky way of going back. I went from search to propositional logic. In between, there was a chapter called CSP. So this is actually CSP again. Okay? So given a constraints unavailable, so here are a whole bunch of problems that are all CSP problems. Okay? Given a set of constraints and available classes and your class requirements, find a suitable class schedule for you. Given a set of constraints on, you are talking about a set of people that you could potentially, I'm thinking of maybe calling some number of you to a party at my home. Okay? And there are all sorts of constraints. This person and this person can't get along. And if those two come, that guy wants to come. There are a whole bunch of constraints like this. Is there a party I can have such that no constraint is violated? That's a constraint satisfaction problem. It's also a SAT problem. Okay? Given a chessboard, put 8 queens on the chessboard such that no pair of queens are conflicting. Constraint satisfaction problem. SAT problem. Okay? Given a Sudoku board, solve it. CSP, SAT. Okay, this was a bit player all this while, but we are now realizing this is actually quite useful. Okay? Given a digital circuit, verify that it works as advertised. That's satisfiability too. Okay, model, basically circuit verification is connected to satisfiability. Okay, and then in fact, in a minute, I will get to one more thing that wouldn't have been the obvious thing you would have thought about, but this, okay. This, remember, there was a planning graph class that we did, right? Where we basically said, I can generate the planning graph, I can write the mutex relations on the planning graph, and then if I search for a valid subgraph of this planning graph that satisfies all the mutex relations, and if I find such a one, that would be a plan itself. That would be a plan itself, right? Okay, and I said original graph plan actually did it, and I didn't explain to you how it did it. One way you can do it, you can convert this problem into a SAT problem. In essence, you will say, for example, everything in the initial state, think of each of these as propositions. Okay? Everything in the initial state must be true. So at RE0, so since the same conditions can come at multiple levels, you index them by the level. So at RE coming here will be at RE0. If it comes here, it will be at RE1, and so on. Okay? So I can say initial state must be true. That means at RE0 and at AE0 and at BE0. That formula captures the initial state for the problem. Okay? And the goals must be true in your model. Okay? So if my goals are in A1 and in A and in B, then I will say in A1 and in B1 must be true in whatever model you find. Now clearly, I can just set them to be true and be done with it. That would be a model. But there are constraints. What are the constraints? If I make something true here, then one of the guys supporting it from the previous level must be said to be true. Otherwise, how do it become true? And if I make any of them true here, then all their preconditions in the previous level must be said to be true. Okay? So you will wind up writing this condition is, if condition is at k, if there is a condition at k, then one of the supporting actions must be true at k minus 1. So I'll write this as in A1 implies load A1 and in B1 because only load A1 is supporting in A. And in B1 implies load B1 and so on. In this case, actually, there are no two actions. None of the conditions are being supported by more than one action. Normally, you will have multiple actions supporting a single condition, so you will put disjunction. So for example, if there are 3 actions supporting in A1, you would have said in A1 implies A1 or A2 or A3. Okay? And then the other condition is, for every guy here, the preconditions must be true as a conjunction. So fly R implies all its preconditions must be true in the previous level. I'll write these as constraints. These constraints oftentimes become, maybe there could be, millions. I mean, there could be at least thousands of constraints with hundreds of variables. Small numbers you can solve, but thousands of constraints with hundreds of variables, you're not going to solve it on a page, piece of paper. The good thing is that the technology for solving satisfiability problems has advanced so much that we can easily solve under minutes problems that have millions of constraints and tens of thousands of variables. Okay? Those are pretty big problems. And satisfiability problem solving is such a hot area that they have their own community. And because they have all these applications, for example, circuit verification becomes connected to SAT. So in fact, some of the best satisfiability algorithms, some of the beginnings of which we'll talk about starting today, have actually been developed in electrical engineering because they need it. So they developed it, and we get, if you are in some other area and you are still supporting, you can convert your problem to SAT, you can essentially use it. So, for example, we can convert all our programs into Intel machine instructions, and we have outsourced making a fast Intel processor to Intel, or whatever, the AMD or whoever. And then we convert our problem into those machine instructions, and they just take care of it. And then it becomes faster when their processor becomes faster. So in fact, if you have a problem and you convert it into a SAT problem like this, then you can sit back and relax. Every year there will be a faster SAT solver, and so you have a faster planner. Okay? So those are all the things that basically can be directly seen as satisfiability problems. They just, they're essentially the one that we were looking at earlier. Okay? And it turns out Boolean satisfiability is NP-complete. That means, NP-complete, what's the input size? Input size is number of variables and number of clauses. And you expect that no algorithm can be found that runs in time less than exponential in the size of the input. That's what NP-complete means. Okay? But it turns out when we look at SAT as a search problem, we will see today and hopefully part of next class that it's actually a much simpler problem than A-star search. Because remember I said A-star search can be done on infinite graphs with infinite depth, and yet be able to find solutions at finite depth. SAT is a finite search space. Do you see that? If I have a knowledge base with 15 variables, how many possible models can I have? 2 power 15. It looks big for you, but it's a number. Beats the heck out of having infinity. Right? So SAT is a finite search problem. What is more is, so for example, here is a SAT problem, by the way. Okay. Now, normally a satisfiability problem essentially just says any set of Boolean, any set of propositional knowledge-based clauses, and you just need to find me a model. But since we already know that any propositional knowledge base can be converted into clausal form, by convention we tend to just focus on the clausal form knowledge bases. Okay? Because if you can do this, then you have done everything else, because everything else can be converted into this. Okay, so here is a set of clauses. I mean, I don't know, you can, as I'm going through this, I'll keep showing you this picture. See if it's obvious to you as to whether P should be true, Q should be true, R should be true. What should be the values for P, Q, R, S, T, U, such that all these constraints will be satisfied. That's what you're trying to look at. And if you figured this out after a couple of minutes, then just do this with the number of clauses being a million and number of variables being about tens of thousands. And then you have a job. You can replace the nearest computer. You are a computer. Okay? Since we can't do it, obviously we have to find out good algorithms for this. Okay. So typically we consider SAT problems after all are converted after the axioms in the knowledge base are converted into clausal form. Now, since we are doing that, we can also talk about subsets of class problems, SAT problems. For example, SAT problems where all clauses are of size k. Right? Since I converted into clausal form, I can, and since we are computer science people, we always want to talk about special cases and see if they have any additional properties. Okay? So Boolean satisfiability just says all of them are clauses. Here's a clause of size 3, here's a clause of size 2, here's a clause of size 2, and so on. Any size. Clause can be of any size. Size is the number of literals in the class. A k-SAT problem is a set of clauses, all of which are of size k. Okay? So you can talk about 1 SAT, 2 SAT, 3 SAT, 4 SAT, etc. A 4 SAT problem is a set of clauses, all of which are of size 4. A 2 SAT problem is a set of clauses, all of which are size 2. A 1 SAT problem is a set of clauses where all clauses are of size 1. Now, assuming that you're still awake, right? My question is, well, we know that Boolean satisfiability is NP-complete, right? But then if I'm talking only about 1 SAT problems, that's some sort of a subset of the general Boolean satisfiability. How hard is 1 SAT problem? How hard is 1 SAT problem? Yeah, basically I'm telling you what should be true and what should be false. And you just said those two true, those two false, and everything else doesn't matter. Do you understand what I'm saying? A 1 SAT party problem is, this guy must come. This guy I can't stand. This guy must come. That's it. Tell me what party can I have. Okay? You say don't call him, call this guy, and any other people. You know, so the rest of you don't matter. You can either come or not come, I'll have a party. That's 1 SAT problem. How hard was that? Linear time. 1 SAT is worth understanding because it's like the silliest SAT problem. Okay? Right? So 1 SAT is linear time. So Boolean SAT is NP-complete. 1 SAT is linear time. What about 3 SAT? It turns out 3 SAT is NP-complete. If every clause is of length 3, then it is as hard as any general Boolean satisfiability problem. Why? Because it turns out that if you give me a general Boolean satisfiability problem, I can convert it in polynomial time to another 3 SAT problem. And if that can then be solved in polynomial time, I solve this in polynomial time. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay? So in the case of 3 SAT, it turns out actually 3 SAT is the first k-SAT problem that's NP-complete. And after that, 3 SAT, 4 SAT, 5 SAT, 15 SAT, they're all NP-complete. Okay? 2 SAT is not obvious. 1 SAT is easy, 3 SAT is NP-complete. What about 2 SAT? I'll tell you right now that 2 SAT is polynomial. It's non-trivial to understand that, but you know, it's not as hard as understanding NP-completeness. 2 SAT is polynomial. What is 2 SAT? All clauses are of length 2. Now, you can think of clauses as constraints. In fact, the following thing can be done. I want to remove this. The nice thing about constraints is, so in fact, if you have PSU in a constraint, so I can think of a graph structure which has P and S and U as vertices. And if there is a constraint between them, that means there is an edge between the 3 variables. Since anyway you're junk today, I'm going actually to probably more deeper topics than we probably do not. Okay. If you have edge between 3 vertices, that's not a normal graph that you know. It's called a hypergraph. It's an hyperedge. Okay. If on the other hand you only have clauses of this form, only Boolean, only clauses of 2 length, then, so this is called the constraint graph. So constraint graph is a graph where the vertices are the variables and the edges correspond to the constraints. Okay, if you only have 2 array constraints, then the constraint graph is actually a normal graph. Otherwise, it becomes a hypergraph. Okay? So here is an example of SAT problem. So what we'll do, and then I said you can even things like this can be converted into SAT problem. So what I want to understand in today is actually just understanding, starting today at least, is to understand how to solve those kinds of problems, how to find and model fast. And it will be a search problem. We'll search for a model. Okay, but before that, I want to make one more point, which is that there is another class of problems called discrete valued CSP problems, which are more general than SAT problems. But they're not really more general because they can be compiled between one and the other. So you have C language and and some other language, all of them can be compiled into each other. Okay? So the discrete CSP problems are actually called the CSP problems in the AI literature. And your textbook basically starts with the discrete CSP problems and then talks about SAT problems as a special case. What's discrete CSP? It's essentially SAT problems, except the variables are not Boolean anymore. They can be multi-valued. Okay? If variables can be multi-valued, and then you have a set of constraints. The constraints are basically saying what are legal, the constraints in a CSP problem tell us what are legal compound assignments over variables, or subsets of variables. So for example, if I wrote P implies Q as a knowledge-based constraint, that means I'm only allowed in the final solution either P true, Q true, or P false, Q anything, but not P true, Q false. So I said the legal compound assignments for P and Q are only 3, not 4, which is what you would have had before. Okay? So in general, you can think of constraints themselves as legal compound assignments over the variables. Okay? And so a CSP problem just tells you the set of variables, the domains over which they range. For a SAT, you don't need to tell me the domain because the domain is always true and false. For a CSP, you can say the color can be red, blue, green, for example. It will become a 3-valued problem. Okay? And then a set of constraints. And the goal is, again, to find an assignment for all the variables that satisfies all the constraints. That means every subset, sub-assignment of the complete assignment is actually a legal assignment. So you're not violating any other constraints. So that's called the general CSP problem, and you can clearly see it's more general than SAT in one way. But you can also see that if I give you a CSP problem, you can convert it into a SAT problem. Do you see that? Suppose I told you that I have a variable called color which can be red or green or blue. I'll make 3 propositions. Color is red. Color is green. Color is blue. I have 3 propositions now, and that's a SAT problem. They all can be true or false. Okay? So in essence, actually, CSP can be converted into SAT, and SAT2 can be converted into CSP, but we won't talk about that. Okay? So because of which, the rest of the discussion I'm doing today, as well as a little part of next class, corresponds to both CSP and SAT. Anything you learn here also corresponds there, essentially. Okay? Okay. So, solving the SAT problems. Idea is extremely simple. All we're going to do is convert into a search problem. In fact, we'll convert into a tree search problem. Okay? We start with an empty assignment. Remember, we finally need an assignment that satisfies all the constraints. Okay, every variable should have a value, either true or false. Okay, so you start with empty in the beginning. Then consider, for example, you could pick. Suppose I have that as my clauses. That's my clauses. Then I could pick p equal to true here, p equal to false here. And so then the assignment here is p true. Assignment here is p false. That's only the small assignment. It's a sub-assignment right now. Okay? And then basically what I would like to do is then I will go underneath this, then consider q true, q false, blah, 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 until you have considered all the variables. Okay? In this particular case, I have p, q, r, s, t, u, right? P, q, r, s, t, u are the variables. P, q, r, s, t, u. 6 variables. So, how deep will this search tree be? 6. So it's general search for CSP, but the depth of the tree is always equal to the number of variables. Right? That's good. I mean, we are coming from general search where there are no guarantees as to how deep the search tree can be. But since CSP is actually, a finite problem, it has finite depth. Okay, depth of the solution is going to be, depth of the tree is going to be n, where n is the number of variables. Where are the solutions going to be in this tree?
Leaf.
Which level are the solutions going to be in the tree?
Leaf.
Always at the leaf level. Right? That's another extra plus point for us, because nobody ever told you, here is a search tree where all the solutions are at the depth k, and k is also the highest depth. Except in that homework problem that I made you do, where you did iterative broadening. The reason is, in fact, iterative broadening kind of ideas came up from here. Okay? So it's a separate kind of search, where you have extra constraints, extra structure. The structure is that all the solutions will be at the nth level. Okay? So, tell me, depth first or breadth first for this?
Depth.
Anybody wants to do iterative deepening depth first? It looks like a good idea. We should do it. If you ever think that maybe anything other than depth first, hit yourself really hard. Because I can't. I mean, there are legal issues about that. Right? Because if all the solutions are at the last level, why are you searching here and here and here? To impress who? Your mother, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, who? All of them must be, sort of easy to impress. If they are impressed when you are searching for here and here, when the solutions are all here. Right? Okay? So, you did this humongous amount of search theory. All you care about is DFS. Because nothing else makes sense. Okay? In fact, the entire SAT algorithms will be just using DFS. And by the way, DFS can be written as a recursive algorithm. And we mentioned that, I think, because it's essentially stack idea. So SAT algorithms can be written as recursive programs because they only always use depth first search. Okay? So basically, I have P true, P false, Q true, Q false, etc. Now here's an interesting question. Should I be considering here also Q true, Q false, and also S true, S false? Must I consider, so what is the branching that I'm doing? What are my branching ideas? Of course, when I wrote it earlier, the branching is, I'm just considering the different values of the same variable. Must I also branch on which variable I actually give value to at that level? Looks like a reasonable thing. Right? Because, except if you do that, here is a way you can convince yourself that that cannot make sense. Why? Because if you actually do that, if you just have one variable at each level, then you got a strict binary tree. A binary tree of depth n has how many leaf nodes? 2 power n leaf nodes. If you do this other idea that I have, you have a branching factor of 2n. Right? And so it will be 2n power 2n. What would make you go from 2n to 2n power 2n? When the number of distinct assignments are only 2n, this cannot make sense. Right? You're just considering multiple different ways of coming to the same node. Well, it could make sense if different ways of coming to the same point will give you different levels of reward. In A star search, you can't do this, right? In A star search, you can't say, I've been to B, I don't have to come back to B again. Well, you may have come to B previously from a different direction, which was 15 units costly, but now you came to B in another different direction, which is only 2 units costly. And so now I like this path more than that path. But in CSP, I don't care how I got the model. If I got the model, I got the model. Okay? So a very interesting point is viewing CSP or SAT as a search problem, you only backtrack over the values of the variable. You do not backtrack on the variables itself at each level. That essentially means, so that could mean one of 2 things. You know that at this level, I don't need to consider P as well as Q as well as S. I need to only consider one of them. The question is, can I consider any of them? And does it matter the order in which I consider the variables? Does it matter the order in which I consider the variables? In 2 different ways. Does it matter in terms of finding a model if a model exists? In terms of finding that model faster? Those are 2 different questions. Does the order in which I consider the variables matter in terms of maybe if I consider them in the wrong order, I would not find some solutions at all? No, right? So you agree with that. Then the other question is, could I have found my answer faster if I used a different order? That does matter, right? I mean, because you want to get done. So here's an idea. You're trying to hold a party in your home. You want to call me, you want to call Bill Gates. Okay? And you need to ask a time when both of us are available. So you have 2 variable choices. First, ask Rao, are you available on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and whatever each of the time points. And for each of the time points where Rao is available, go ask Bill Gates, are you available? The other is first ask Bill Gates, when is he available? And then ask Rao, when are you also available at that time? Both ways you will get the same solutions. Which one do you think you will do less work? You think Bill Gates is somehow more busier than me? Is that what you're trying to say? Well, I guess that's what you meant, right? In essence, you're thinking that basically Bill Gates probably will say, oh, you want me to come to a party? Yes, I'm available from 4 o'clock to 4:05 on July 24th, 2014, right? And then you come and ask Rao, are you available? And I say, yes, it's a party, and you're calling me. Right? You found the solution. So, did the order matter? Of course. If you went the other way around, you keep knocking on Bill Gates' door. So you'll ask Rao, are you available right now? Yes, I'm available. So you go to Bill Gates and ask, are you available now? No. Then you come back and ask Rao, are you available 10 minutes later? I'll say yes. And then you go back to Bill Gates and ask, but after a while, they'll put you in jail. Right? Because you are, bothering the heck out of Bill Gates. Right? So, what did we do? Essentially, we at least are, convince ourselves that the order in which you branch on the variables matters a whole lot. So if you had heuristics, so basically the big issue is, if you're doing depth first, then what are the heuristics? We did this whole entire idea of heuristics, etc. for A-star search, right? So where are the heuristics now? If you're doing DFS, you don't need any heuristics, right? But you have, for CSP and SAT, you need heuristics for variable ordering. Variable ordering heuristics. Okay? And in fact, there is this Bill Gates idea I gave you, it actually has a very interesting idea. Why did you go with Bill Gates first rather than me? Because you assume that Bill Gates is more constrained than I am. You're wrong, actually. But, let's assume for now that's true. Okay? So Bill Gates is more constrained than I am. So you always branch on the variable that is more constrained. So the most constrained variable first is the idea of your heuristic. And it's a beautiful idea. Because if you call the most constrained first, then you have much fewer branches to consider. Because the few branches that's available, other people have to be available in those, otherwise there is no solution. Because, again, you might say at some point of time, Bill Gates seems to be acting all high and mighty, I won't call him for the party. If you do that, you are not doing SAT. In SAT, everybody must have, if I said that both Bill Gates and Rao must be called for the party, then both of them should be called for the party. That means that those are constraints. You don't get to violate constraints in normal SAT problems. There's a variation of SAT problems called weighted SAT and max SAT, where you will say, yeah, I understand there is no model that satisfies all the constraints. Find me a model that satisfies most of the constraints. Find me a model that satisfies most of the most important constraints. And if you do that, you can start having values for each of the constraints. And that is the penalty you will suffer if you violate this constraint. And then give me a solution that has the lowest penalty available, lowest penalty connected to it. If you do max SAT, all of a sudden, it's now a much more interesting problem, because you now have different solutions have different costs. And not all solutions have to be at the lowest level. Okay, but we are only looking at the SAT. So I'll stop here, and next class, we'll look at a couple of, this basically flesh out this idea into something called Davis-Putnam-Lodgeman-Loveland procedure, which is, a great idea for doing satisfiability. And then talk about all the other things that happened in SAT, and, and then move on from there.